friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forrest. Thank you for joining us. This week, I have a conversation with Michelle Lhooq. Michelle has a Substack, and she's a writer. It's called Rave New World. We met first when I was doing the event with John Hopkins in Austin, and we did a little interview there and sort of stayed in touch, and we have a lot of crossover in this sort of psychedelic world that we're all in, that's burgeoning forth. And so I've been meaning to connect with her, and I'm glad we were able to do it. It's a great conversation. I know you are going to enjoy it. A little bit of housekeeping about some events coming up, some details. Treefort Music Fest come up in Boise, Idaho. That's kind of like next up on the docket for me. And I'm actually going to be doing 3 different things. So I'm going to be part of Yogafort again. I'll be part of the Treefort Fest doing a live music set. And I'm also going to be part of Filmfort, where we're going to be doing a work-in-progress screening of the Music for Mushrooms documentary. It's a big deal. It's kind of the first public time we've been showing the entire film. Also, for my Treefort set, it's going to be like a 20-minute portion of the film, and then I'll go right into my live set from there. And of course, Yogafort is with my sweetheart, Marissa Rada-Wepner, and that's going to be back at the Jump Space, that beautiful large Jump Space. And you should get tickets for all of it. You can get a Treefort pass. I think you can go to all of that, or you can get a Yogafort pass and go to my music stuff and the yoga stuff, or just a Filmfort pass. But basically, Yogafort's on March 21st at 10 in the morning at Jump, and March 23rd, Saturday, is my Filmfort, where we're doing the screening of the documentary at 3 p.m., and Sunday, March 24th at 2:30 p.m. at Treefort Music Hall, the new Treefort Music Hall. Great sound system there. We'll do just like a little tiny bit of the documentary into my live set. So that'll be fun. And then I'm headed over to Miami to jump on the Summit at Sea, and we'll be doing a ceremony concert and also a 20-30 minute screening. Same kind of thing, like a little bit of the doc straight into a live set. Summit at Sea is a multi-day thing. Also, cool thing I'm going to do there is be hosting a conversation with Robert Thurman, who's been on the podcast, the great Buddhist scholar. So I'm looking forward to getting a chance to sit down with Bob, and that will be at Summit at Sea. There's a lot more coming this year. We're going to announce it. We're sort of creating lots of events for the documentary and music and all sorts of things. So get on the newsletter if you're not on it over at eastforest.org. And we try to post this stuff on socials, but newsletter is by far the best way. But socials are at East Forest or East Forest Music. And on the Patreon, I just posted several long-form ceremonies stuff. I get to put on the Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest, all sorts of things that don't have a home anywhere else. I posted the entire ceremony. I played at one of the last Esalen retreats, and I placed demos up there and songs that don't get released, live performances. I do little mixes on them. So check it out. I mean, you can join at lots of different tiers. Even I think there's even like a trial where you don't pay anything for a week, and see if you like it. It's a great way to support this podcast, great way to support the project in general. We also do a monthly Zoom council. I also do a one-on-one if you're interested in that. It's all at patreon.com/eastforest. And thank you to everyone on our council, the council on Patreon, that's what we call it, for being a part of that and sharing this journey together. It definitely makes it richer. All right, let's dive into this conversation with our new friend, Michelle Lhooq. All right, Michelle, thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. It's great to finally be here.
Yeah. Where are you? You were bouncing around the world. You said you were in Singapore, but now you're in somewhere with birds.
Yeah. Well, we have birds in Asia too, but I guess different tropical birds, right?
Well, it's winter, and I don't hear many birds. But it sounds like wherever you are is nice out.
Yeah, I'm back in LA. I'm based in LA, although most people don't know that because I'm always bouncing around so much. But I did spend 3 months in Asia, visiting Singapore, which is where I was born. And then I popped over to Thailand and Taiwan too.
Okay, but where did you grow up?
Well, I had a very sort of peripatetic childhood. I was sort of
Nice.
born in Singapore, moved to Tokyo, lived in Westchester in upstate New York, and then went back to Tokyo, and then finally graduated high school from Singapore again. So I know that's confusing, but
Okay. Wow. I went to Japan for the first time recently and absolutely loved it. One of my favorite places now in the whole planet. We had a great time in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Played my first show
nice.
over there.
Where did you
Loved
play?
it. It was like a venue called, I think it was called like Harame. It was in a pretty nice little neighborhood. It was like a downstairs basement club, but they had a really lovely piano, which I thought was cool. It was a small club. They also had this little VIP area that you sit in the club that was like just these little tea tables, and I thought that was really cool.
Nice.
And the owner also owns this absinthe bar that was in the area that was like crowdfunded or something. And we went there and it was like amazing.
That's cool. Yeah, I feel like when I grew up, I remember there being a lot of absinthe bars randomly, and I wonder,
Really?
I wonder if it's because it's so hard to get drugs in Japan, and people obviously want some kind of psychoactive experience, and so maybe like there's something about absinthe having that sort of like mythical, like pseudo psychedelic quality that people are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. Like just being there, I was wondering, I've heard it's fairly conservative, but of course, I think people are kind of the same everywhere. There's probably a lot of people there looking for interesting experiences. And Peter Broderick and I were playing this festival outside of Tokyo that was technically an ambient festival. But when I think of those sorts of things in the States, it'd be like, I don't know, maybe not a very big thing, or maybe things kind of go into the consciousness sort of crunchy zone. This was like the cool kids. They had craft beer. They had this artisanal ramen guy there doing his thing, really good coffee. Everyone was dressed really cool, but it was out in nature. And I was like, man, I wish like a lot of festivals were like this in the States. And I was trying to put my finger on like what the culture is there about psychedelics or consciousness bending, and I could never quite understand, what the zeitgeist is.
Well, Japanese people are really into acid. And I think that's because
Really?
it's really easy to get it through the borders. And so it's kind of the only thing available, or back when I lived there, which was in the mid 2000s. Things might have changed, but from what I've heard, it is still pretty rare to find drugs. But I do think that there's this strain of like psychedelic music, psychedelic techno that runs in the Japanese underground, which I really appreciate. And what you're saying about the like sort of cool kid, like kind of hippie, but also like kind of a different vibe. I don't know how to quite describe it, but I know exactly what kind of festival you're talking about in Asia. And I love that too, because I think that's definitely a thing that started happening in the last few years. Like I went to a couple in Thailand, and I was hearing stories from friends as well of like festivals that incorporate like native village traditions into like the food or the textiles and the decor or whatever. And I feel like when you do that kind of stuff in the States, like it immediately becomes so crunchified.
Yeah. Yes. Always. It's like a whole aesthetic.
Yeah, but like there it's sort of this interesting hybridity of like their own indigenous culture, I guess, that a lot of Asian societies are finally paying more attention to, and then like mixing that with like really interesting electronic music. I don't know. For some reason, it feels like
there's some good music.
Maybe it feels like less exotified to me or something because it's happening in Asia for Asians usually. Which we can get into that too.
Yeah. Well, the people there were Japanese. It was definitely folks from the area. I played something else in China, and it was very different. That was more like, how do you describe it? Like, it was like, in some ways more Western in a sense. Like they brought it was sort of that idea of like taking Eastern ideas and pumping them through the West and then Western people bringing them back to the East. In that sense, it was very strange, as opposed to it feeling like it was Chinese or something come from the area. And it was sort of getting on this idea of almost like quantum business or like wellness as a way of a very Western idea, like we're going to maximize our productivity or like be better humans or self-improvement in that sense. And that was a very different flavor in Japan. I just found like you said, it was just way more grounded or something. I don't know, but it's just one experience, but these are all big
it's
countries.
funny because I think that in some senses, psychedelic culture in Asia is an import because, you know, we're all looking to American counterculture in the 60s and 70s, basically, to inform ideas of what like psychedelic culture could be. Personally, I feel like it's a little bit dated to always be referencing that era, and I'm more interested in like what it could be today. But like because of prohibition and the way that like drugs have been so, I would say, even more stigmatized in the East for so long, I find that like a lot of people who are waking up to like wellness culture and psychedelic culture in Asia are more like Western facing. That said, like one strain that I'm really interested in is like we were kind of mentioning before, like in the culture of indigenous plant medicine in Asia. Like, I think one of the coolest things about Thailand that I've recently discovered is how deep their weed culture goes. And they have like,
No way.
like, I mean, weed grows indigenously in that area. And like, I think there's been like a whole forgetting about how deeply rooted it is in that land. And there's like villages up in the north of Thailand where people are, you know, all these villagers are like they're hemp villages. They're making all of their clothes and food, and then they have like medicinal soups where like weed is like one of like 100 different ingredients in the soup, and it's so casual. And I think that's the reason why Thailand was like the first country in Asia to legalize weed, even though they're now trying to roll it back. I don't know if you saw that, but it's kind of chaotic.
No.
Like it's so crazy. You go to Thailand and there's just like a million little weed shops everywhere, and it's so chill, and you can like pop into them and eat like, you know, like weed infused pad thai. Like it's just the way that it should be. It's not overly regulated, but the problem is that the government feels like they kind of just let everyone do whatever they wanted too quickly, and they're not taxing it properly, and maybe like there's a lot of conservative backlash against it. So recently there was like an announcement that they're going to try and make recreational weed illegal, which is kind of weird. It's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And there, to me, it seems almost like an impossible endeavor, because it's like, wow, you're really going to try and close down all of these like little streets. I mean, you know, it's so hard to police every single street corner. If New York can't do it, I don't know if Thailand
New York.
can do
I was going to
it.
say New York. Yeah.
But like, like I didn't go to this festival, but I've heard a lot of really good things. There's a festival in Thailand called Double Dick Tiger. The best festival name I've ever heard. And it's very much this vibe, you know? It's like you go out to like this remote village full of like villagers participating in it. Weed is like kind of consumed as like a natural plant medicine, and it feels super Thai. And I really fuck with that paradigm. I think like Asia is waking up a little bit to its own history of plant medicines, and that's super exciting for me, because maybe they'll interpret it in their own way.
I would think mushrooms had some kind of basis in a lot of those places just by the fact that they have to grow there. They must. And it's kind of everywhere, but it's amazing how it's hard to track sometimes the through line of where those began, or if they were there or not, or if it really ever took hold. But I didn't know that about weed in Thailand. Isn't Thailand pretty strict about its drug laws in general?
Well, that's why it's kind of this
strict?
weird but very fascinating contradiction that, like, yeah, they do have very strict drug laws, including for weed until very recently. But I think that it was the allure of potentially becoming an industrial level producer of weed and hemp for global trade eventually. Obviously, it's not possible right now, but maybe they wanted to seize the opportunity to be an early adopter, especially given that they are already a very agricultural country. And then, like I said, that like weed is almost like this undercurrent that's already embedded in the culture. It's kind of unspoken. And, I think that a lot of Thai families probably won't like indulge. But it was cool going to a lot of these like dispensaries that were owned by local Thais and seeing that a lot of the clientele were also local Thais. It wasn't just another tourism bubble. Like so much of Thailand is like, kind of sadly, I think, like reliant on tourism, and they create these little bubbles of whiteness for white people to come through and feel like they're having their quote unquote Thai experience, but it's so gentrified,
Yeah.
But the weed I think is very interesting because you have all these different levels. You have like all the big American weed brands coming through and trying to do their thing, but then you also have these little like mom and pop stands run by Thai people, and they're selling like Thai strains, Thai sticks, and it's full of really casual like Thai people coming through. Sometimes they even bring their kids, and it's just so much more like this is how it should be. Like there doesn't need to be a security guard with like 6 guns like waiting in like a side room where you have to like check in like a prisoner and like show like your ID. Like it's just so crazy in California,
Yeah. But do you think that the sort of psychedelic movements or whatever's going on globally, maybe even just in Asia, is always sort of being inspired or is chasing where things are at in the States? Like this is sort of the leading that charge and everyone's reacting to that? Or there are separate scenes going on as far as this psychedelic renaissance that's happening?
Well, I think it's a complex question because, like, I would say that the psychedelic culture in the States is also chasing a lot of Asian mysticism influences. So it is this back and forth in a way, right? But I do think that the idea of like wellness culture as a tool for optimization is an idea that came out of the West. And that's something that I think a lot of Asian societies are picking up on because obviously a lot of those societies are very geared towards like hyper productivity as well. But yeah, I mean, when you think about like Thailand again, like their whole mushroom culture and like full moon raves in Thailand, like those are its own thing. And even though they do cater to a lot of expats and white people, I would put it in a separate category. Probably the same category as like psytrance raves in Goa, India, where
Oh,
like
really?
it's it's kind of like a global nomad kind of vibe of like different people from all over the world coming as backpackers, and seeking alternatives to like Western hegemony in a way, but then also
Yeah.
imposing their own form of colonialism onto the local culture sometimes. So, like I said, I think it's complex.
Yeah. Well, what are your feelings about the state of the psychedelic thing going on here in the States? It's a lot going on, of course, but are you optimistic about it, or are you more sanguine, or is it more sort of you have some critiques in sort of the directions it's heading, or blind spots it might have?
Yeah, I mean that's such a big question. Maybe I'll just
We can pick a part of it.
yeah.
We could start with well, we could start with music. We talked about maybe talking about that. That's an area that I feel like, and weirdly, isn't talked about so much inside this happening. It's sort of almost an afterthought in
Yeah,
a way, from my
right.
perspective, except from maybe the entertainment side or people going to festivals and enjoying music. I've always thought of it as
Yeah.
psychedelic in a sense, but how it interfaces as more like a tool or something important to discuss as part of the picture. I find that it's largely
Yeah,
absent.
let's talk about music. I would love to.
All
Yeah,
right. We both
that's
like
something
music.
that I can feel optimistic about, I think.
Cool. What are you optimistic about in the scenes of music right now that have crossover with
Yeah, I
psychedelics?
think that there's a whole world opening up of musicians experimenting with psychedelic modalities within their music that's different from classic, I guess, new age ideas of what psychedelic music should be. And that's, you have the whole spectrum from like these super Silicon Valley AI enhanced tech apps that are kind of using algorithms to create like what they say
Yeah.
are the most resonant frequencies, and honestly they don't sound very good. um
Yeah. Surprise,
Right. But
surprise.
then you have,
Yeah.
I feel like, so many musicians in the underground, like here in LA, musicians who like to throw parties in the parks and maybe come from more of like the music scene, but they've always done psychedelics and they've been going to ceremonies and they're hearing the music and kind of putting their own spin on like what music could be to guide your trip. And I would so much rather listen to musicians like that than to put on a Spotify playlist of like psychedelic music or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
Or like even listening to like a techno musician who is doing like a 3-hour mix, of like uninterrupted music. I think that is a relatively new digital technology that has not existed for that long and is so much better than like a track by track playlist that's like swinging you around from mood to mood.
Totally. Totally, man. That's my thing with the playlist. It's like I feel like every time a new artist comes on, it's like a new soul walks in the room or something. You kind of have to reorient for a second. Like, okay, whoa, all right, where are we? Who is this? All right, and usually the pieces aren't that long, and then you're just kind of getting into it, and then you're switching to something else. And I think in some ways, maybe even epigenetically, we're used to having one artistic voice, in a sense, carry us through these experiences. And there isn't a lot out there for that right now. I mean, frankly, a lot of people don't even know the difference between a playlist and an album. That kind of surprises me. They keep using the word playlist now interchangeably. But I'm curious who you're jamming on or stuff you've heard that is like more bespoke for that use.
Yeah, well, I was just having a conversation with this artist, Paige Emery, here in LA, who is releasing an album on Leaving Records this
Yeah.
month, and she is making music for plant medicine and meditation, and is definitely drawing a lot from her own experiences in ceremony. So I think the whole Leaving Records family basically are really kind of tapping into this modality. The founder of Leaving, Matthew David, he has an album called On Mushrooms. I'm also really into like some of the like I said, sort of like more techno leaning producers that are experimenting with this modality, like the ones in Detroit. There's this artist called Oto Dojo that came out with an album on the Bunker recently that I thought was phenomenal, and starts out very, very meditative and then kind of builds into this like psychedelic techno climax that kind of feels like how this is what I want to listen to when I'm tripping.
Mm.
I don't necessarily always
Hmm.
want to listen to like kirtan music or something like that, although that's really nice too. But I really, coming from the nightlife world, like I really trust certain DJs, especially the ones who've like done a lot of plant medicines themselves, to know how to channel energy and how to sort of build an energetic journey up and down over a long time span. I think that that's like a really interesting
Hmm.
skill that like DJs cultivate that's similar to how maybe an ayahuasquero might be thinking about music to guide trips. So yeah, I'm really interested by this like influx of like new sounds and new people making music for these experiences. Although I agree with you that there's not enough out there yet. And the other day
Yeah.
I was gonna do like a macrodose journey, and I was like, oh man, I need to like think of a playlist for myself because there isn't something that I can just put on. I mean, there isn't much beyond like your music, for example, and some of the others that I just mentioned. But there's been so much interesting research into like what the flow of a mix or a playlist should be if you go back to like the experiments with LSD in the 50s and 60s, like actual music therapists were like, okay, we need to study like what order of songs, like what kinds of
Mm-hmm.
notes, like what kinds of resonances can create like the most optimal psychedelic therapy soundtrack. And I feel like that's wisdom that
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of musicians these days could really think about, and draw from. You know, obviously it's a subjective experience, but there have been really interesting um like leaps forward in the way that we understand this through the research. So I'm curious about you, like how do you think about the music that you're making when you're making music? I mean, I know that you've literally performed at ceremonies, so yeah, how do you think about that music?
Well, I mean, first I'd say that there is lots of interesting new research, largely about also just music and art in general and how beneficial it is for the brain in all these different ways, and some really interesting stuff coming out about like healing certain things with like dementia
Mm-hmm.
and crazy real
Mm-hmm.
things going on. I've had some folks on the podcast talking about it, but artistically, yeah, I kind of feel that like the songs that have been used for millennia and how that was developed, and even the structure, like ceremony itself, to me is just a kind of structure that was developed to be like, this is what we find works the best. Like for say like a Lakota Sweat Lodge or something, and then we created these songs, and this is the order we do it and the ritual we like to do it, and this works the best. Codify it. Let's not change it so you don't fuck it up, because we learned this, you know, for a long time. And the music, I'd imagine, like all music, came from a place of like creative play, I would think, as opposed to like this tone will do this or we know this will do that. It's more like people discovered things by just the human spirit of like making songs over the years. And I kind of feel like that playfulness, especially through improvisation, is really the key, and it's the doorway to the magic. I think of like Indian ragas or something. It's like that's what it's all about. It's like getting to a zone where you're kind of gotten out of the way and something's just flowing. And I took a small page from that when I was trying to do it as well, and it's largely for me had to be improvisationally based. And I found that was the only way it really worked for me, was if I didn't have a preconceived song or performance. It's more like something will just come through and we're going to flow with it. And it's in response to people in the journey right here in the room. And so in that way, I feel like you're giving it over to something larger, whether that's just not your own identity at its best. And that, to me, is a key piece. I mean, I'd love to see more people getting into that improvisational space where they're actually working with some of those medicines to see what it inspires, because it's difficult to then translate that and sit down in an intellectual way and be like, all right, I'm going to make some decisions. I think it should be in C minor and this or that. It can work. But I think like the real magic is in when you open it up to not planning as
Right.
much.
And are you kind of reacting to how people's reactions to the medicine is in the room? Like if you see people, here's my question, I guess. Like if you see someone having like kind of a challenging time, you as a musician, I
Yeah.
feel like have so much power to decide how you want to take them forward. Like are you going to
Yeah.
continue pushing them even more to like maybe have some kind of breakthrough? Like, or do you want to kind of take them back and play more soothing music so that they can relax? Like I mean that's a really hard decision, I feel
Mhm.
like, and a lot of responsibility as a
Yeah.
musician.
Yeah. I'd say it's both. And it's often there's groups. So it's not, maybe you hear one predominant thing going on. But in general, it's sort of like a collective process where it's more like the job is keeping your hand on the wheel of the ship in a sense. It's like, look, storms might come. Okay, we're in a storm. And the biggest thing is like, we're going to keep going. So it's like, even with the chaos, perhaps it's like you're going to keep something for us to travel with, and knowing that all storms pass. And so there will be intuitive hits of like, oh, I'm just feeling like going more minor or major here might actually be in the direction it wants to go for some reason, or adding in some strings here, or getting simpler. We need some space, or no, we should go bigger here. That's all just that sense of play again, because you're right. It's incredibly influential to a journey, but you can also never know exactly what's going on with everybody. So at the end of the day, you're giving it up to like, and you always hear these crazy synchronicities that people have about like when this flute came, it was exactly at the moment, like I was having a vision of like my Inca mother or something. And I'm like, cool. Like, and yeah, and I think that only could happen if I'm like in the moment being like, I don't know, I'm inspired to pick up the flute and I do it, as opposed to like, that's like something playing through all of us in a sense.
Do you also imbibe during these ceremonies a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But a little, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
buttons and knobs.
Yeah.
A
I do
lot.
wonder,
Yeah.
like, if being, yeah, like even just a little bit under the similar frequency wavelengths as everyone else does help you to sort of move intuitively with the energy of the space. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I think like therapists who want to get into space and have never journeyed or something, I'm like, to me, that's crazy. It's like you have to have some familiarity with the space. And I know in a lot of ayahuasca, at least in Peruvian traditions that I've experienced, and I was a sitter a few times, they gave me like some ayahuasca on my tongue, which I was like, wait a minute. I didn't think, and you don't really journey, but I get it. I
Yeah.
totally get it. It's like, no, we're
Yeah.
all here. Like, and we want to open up even a little bit to that spirit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel the same way about booking my mushroom raves. Um,
Yeah, tell me more about those. Yeah.
so I'm just super interested in creating like events or parties where we experiment with, collectively imbibing a substance together, and going on a shared musical journey with a DJ who is themselves, I would say, very proficient in the idea of
Yeah.
psychedelic music. And that is a really interesting creative challenge, I think, because people, especially from outside of the plant medicine psychedelic world, have very different interpretations, I think, of like what mushroom music can be. And I think that's fun. I think that's great. I think that like it could be, drum and bass if you play the right kinds of tracks. But I have noticed that, I have booked DJs who don't really do very much mushrooms and might be more of a cocaine person, for example. And this isn't shade to cocaine. Like cocaine can be great too,
Different
I
energy.
love chewing on
Yeah.
coca leaves, actually. I love that that feeling, that stimulation. But their sets sound like cocaine to me. And that means that they're much more maybe driving, like more sort of linear chugging kinds of experiences, and not so much this sort of like bleep, bleep, bloop, bleep, like very fluid, very vibey, kind of in your body kind of music that I think mushroom dancers are craving. So I kind of made a new rule for myself where I'm not going to book anyone anymore who isn't super, super interested in experimenting with mushrooms themselves and, can kind of lend that experience towards their, decisions as a musician throughout the night. And yeah, I mean, a little bit more about my parties is that one thing I think is really cool is that we're also oriented towards like sobriety as well. Like, even though people are welcome to fall as far down the rabbit hole as they want, like, I think that placing psychedelic use in relation within the conversation of sobriety feels very contemporary to me. And so, yeah, it's a place where we encourage people to microdose or just come sober. And we usually bring in, for the last one, we had a whole bar of like legal plant medicines. So things like kanna, kava, kratom. Yeah, in a sense, it is harm reduction, I guess. Like,
That's what I wanted to ask you about. Yeah. Because if you're saying it's a safe space in a sense to go as far down the rabbit hole as you want, inevitably there's going to be outlier situations where I'm sure you're thinking about like, look, we don't want anyone to be unsafe physically and certainly not emotionally or sexually in any way that would cause harm, which can be very real when you're letting go and you're out of control of your normal faculties in that way. What are you doing to feel like then if there's that sort of invitation that you're able to hold that sort of invitation?
yeah, I think that I was really afraid as like a host of someone, having a bad time and having a difficult trip and me not knowing how to handle that. Obviously in rave culture, people are constantly doing all kinds of drugs and dancing really close to the edge. And a lot of people do fall off that edge at the party, I would say. There
Yeah.
aren't many guardrails in traditional rave culture for especially more psychic experiences. But I mean, what think that's been really helpful is tapping into the community of plant medicine guides and people who are trip sitters and do have a lot of that
Hmm.
experience. And yeah, I think like some friends of mine who were hearing me kind of freak out about this risk and responsibility were able to connect me with people who have done this work for a really long time. And so we created a little safe space. We always have like a little safe space zone, which is where people can go if they just need a breather. And it's usually a very dark, candlelit space with no music.
I wish every party had that. I wish every bar had that.
Yeah,
Just a place you can
I
go and
know.
take
And
a
a lot of
break.
my friends who are like, I would say pretty experienced drug users still made use of that space. They were like, oh yeah, at one point I did
Yeah.
like a little bit too much K and I just wanted to lie down. And so I went there. And I mean, yeah, I think everybody has the experience of so-called slipping on the banana peel at a party. So that's a good place to land. But what was really interesting is a lot of the trip sitters later told me that they felt like they actually had more conversations with people who had never done drugs before or never done a psychedelic and were coming there just to ask questions about how does this work.
Yeah.
So I think that,
Yeah.
being so deep in the psychedelic world, sometimes we forget that like most people don't have a reliable space to even access these medicines. And then B, when they do, have no idea what they're doing. And like what's cool, I guess, about a party is that you're surrounded by people who are also partaking. So there's no judgment and you can maybe find resources and, tap into the communal wisdom that exists around these substances, which I think is much better than maybe reading an article on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It's like so many people are turning on in just their curiosity. And I think about the sort of doorways that are open to them to have support or guidance. Music's a huge one. I believe one of the most democratized things we could put out there that could guide people that's fairly accessible to most folks. And that's one of the main reasons I think we need more out there. It's sort of made for that so that that too. You're like, oh, this would be good for that. And maybe it can guide me through. But doing the events you're doing is another flavor. I mean, what else are you seeing out there that's outside of like, psychedelic therapy where it's like a whole different, very specialized thing?
Yeah. You mean what else have I seen besides my party?
Yeah, like, well, we're sort of dancing into ceremony here, but it's sort of like just what is out there for people to experience psychedelics either by themselves or collectively that maybe is new.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of mushroom stands popping up at like parties that you would not necessarily think that would be the vibe. Like Art Week just happened in LA, right? We had like a lot of art fairs and gallery shows, and at several of the after parties that I went to, there was like a guy selling mushroom tea. And like a really,
Mm.
dark, crowded basement with like thumping music. It's interesting because I think that a lot of people are turning towards mushrooms to get away from alcohol these days. Um,
Mm.
so you also conversely see a lot of mushrooms coming into alcohol, traditionally alcohol centric spaces, which I think is really interesting.
God, it's so different. And whenever I think about mushrooms, it's like it's a bit of a commitment. I mean, it takes some time, and it's not. It, for me, if I have any mushrooms, even the smallest amount, it just turns into a ceremony space for me. I'm very sensitive. It's like I just want to go cry somewhere, or do some work. It's like I can't do email or sit there and joke around. I just can't. But maybe that's my own Pavlovian training in a sense, but I'm just surprised. Like in that dark basement, I would think that this could be one of the worst places to take it now, or you'd probably be leaving in an hour and then it'd kick in, and then where are you headed? I just hope people think about these things. I want them to have good experiences.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a wildness to the underground right now, which I enjoy. because I think it's a special
Yeah.
time where we're in this sort of transition of like, let's just call it decriminalization, even though it hasn't actually happened in California, but it feels like we're already there, you know, where you go to
Mm.
like a mushroom conference or something, and they have an entire room of people just selling bags and bags of mushrooms out in the open. There's like, I think, a lack of fear of there's a lack of paranoia that feels pretty liberatory. You know, just considering how much fear we've been living in for the last few decades. And I'm really interested
Yeah.
in this idea of like making psychedelics more accessible through music, like you just mentioned, because psychedelic therapy is so expensive, as we know, to like do it legally,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's funny because like the last time I actually tried ketamine therapy in a clinic, the music was so bad that I actually almost stopped the journey. I
Kills
almost like
me.
ripped off
Yeah,
the
it just
IV
kills
and
me.
was just like, I need to go. Like,
It's
I
like, what
can't
the
listen to
fuck?
this.
Yeah.
The music is so bad.
Ugh.
But then you go to like these more sort of free form events where people are doing ketamine and doing mushrooms and maybe paying a little bit more attention to the music. And it feels like you're getting so much more out of the experience than just like sitting in a chair with your headphones on. I don't know. But, you know, that said, I wonder if the idea that like music is inherently democratizing because you can like put on a playlist and listen to it yourself at home, or like go to a concert and listen to, you know, psychedelic music and have like a vaguely therapeutic experience. But like, yes, I think that is sort of a way to make the psychedelic healing journey more accessible. But like, I could see a lot of these ketamine, I mean, I know actually a lot of these ketamine clinics are already selling like super custom, like personalized live music experience for their clients.
Really? That must cost a lot of
Yeah,
money.
it's like, here's a DJ who's gonna come through and like play both live and DJ sets that's like customized to your
Wow.
ketamine journey.
I mean, it's not that far to say like, hey, if it's a group, you know, and now it's basically like a little concert, or now if it's a bigger concert. I kind of think that the way AI is headed, and with sort of our drowning in information and content that's coming even more than it is now, that people are going to be more and more hungry for those in-person group experiences where it's like there's humans with humans, especially if they see another human, whatever that's leading, whatever it is you're doing, musician or otherwise, that's just, there's a human doing the human thing. And I could see that, I could see psychedelics like interfacing with that in a big way, because it's just an amplifier. You know, it's like, it's already cool, but I could see that becoming maybe more popular because people get more hungry for like that connection to something authentic.
I
and
agree,
human.
because, you know,
Music could be the way.
the
you
one
know?
thing that it's almost impossible to do when you're tripping is look at your phone.
That's right. Screens,
Screens.
right? They don't. It's like a dream. You know, in dreams, you can't look at clocks. You ever notice that, or
Yeah.
screens? It's the
Oh my
same
God,
thing.
you're
It's the
right.
same thing.
And
Yeah.
I think there's a similar parallel current happening in rave culture too, where there's a lot of parties that don't let you bring your phone in or put stickers on your camera, and don't allow
Yeah.
photography. And I think that these spaces feel almost sacred because you don't see a single screen when you're in there the whole time. And people are definitely craving that experience as well. So when you combine the two, it's so potent.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think music is going to be, I think that's why I'm like excited. We have to incentivize artists though too to enter that space more. And right now, to make music in the space is actually sort of anti-capitalistic in a way. It's like long form, and even a lot of these clinics, they're not paying for the music. They don't even think about, most of them, some of the smaller ones, like they're not even thinking in their head like, oh, if I'm using Spotify playlist in a commercial setting and charging thousands of dollars for ketamine, like if that's a fair exchange for what the music's doing in this. They're just like, I don't know. It's just music. You can play it. It's on Spotify. It's a playlist.
how much danger do you think there is in this idea that, the luxury psychedelic world is going to commodify the music of psychedelics the way that they've commodified everything else, and make the ability to access like high quality psychedelic music, like a very sort of tech enhanced, AI enhanced, like bougified, super customized experience. Like how likely is it that they're going to corner the market in some way, maybe by like employing all of the musicians to make like exclusive music for their
Yeah, I
apps, or
doubt
I
that.
don't know how.
No one's calling. Yeah, no. I don't think they can. I think music itself is too like from the ground up. Like it always is, always will be in that way. I think the bigger danger is sort of not just, it's sort of like our general tendency to take ideas like psychedelics themselves and the movement and try to squeeze it into neoliberal capitalism and just fit it into that. So help us do what we're doing even more, like squeeze out more profits, more greed, be more productive, these sorts of things. And really, to me, the psychedelic experience is a transformer because it's breaking a lot of that stuff down. Like if you really enter into the experience, inevitably you're going to have some kind of reckoning with your habits and your routines, probably. Or it becomes more about an us versus an I. If you're really doing the work, I feel like it can also easily go into self-aggrandizement and delusion,
Right.
paranoia, and that's maybe a litmus test. But what I'm trying to say is that I don't think they could take psychedelic music and bottle in that way, only because like I believe in the magic of it. Like there's stuff about it that I don't understand. It's already talked about like how do you make the music in the ceremonies? Like part of me is like I don't know, and I only think it works when I get into that space of I don't know. And whatever is going on with music and psychedelics right now, I want to see more of it. And I actually think the attempts to bottle it in a way will actually hinder it. We'll just keep it down in a sense. It won't blossom yet. And when we need it to get to a space where it's like fun and and more people are seeing the value in that. And so I think the intentionality helps. Certainly economic models would help people, but we're going in the opposite direction. We're going like TikTok, things being 30 seconds long, short. And we kind of need the kryptonite to that, which is like patience and long form and last thing I'll say is when I would play for people on mushrooms, I remember I used to think 15 years ago when I started this, oh, they will only like my music on mushrooms. Like this would never work outside this because I have their attention and we're all just so present and we need the music to be long and patient. And it took me a long time to sort of work with that fear or get over that. But I'm seeing more and more people like as a symptom of our sped up world really needing the real medicine we need is that slowing down. There's that great Bio Akamalafe line I love, the times are urgent, let us slow down. And it feels true to me. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that I still believe, obviously, in the power of these medicines to heal, even though I am currently in a very cynical place, I would say, about the industry at large. You asked me earlier, like, how I felt about the direction things are going, and I think that I've really shifted, in my opinion, since moving to California about 7 years ago, sort of starry-eyed, being from, a region of the world where the question of legalizing drugs, at least when I was growing up, totally not even plausible,
Were you talking when were you in
Singapore,
Singapore before?
which
Is
is
very
literally
strict on
death
drugs, right?
penalty. And like,
Yeah,
I
hardcore.
have friends who've disappeared for smoking weed. It's really,
Wow,
really, really
what?
bad.
That's so
Yeah, it's
hardcore.
the opposite of anything that you can imagine happening here. It's like total prohibition, total stigmatization, total paranoia, total
Yeah.
fear. But the thing is, people still do it. People still do drugs in Singapore. And not just like super scary delinquent, like whatever, like gangsters, but like not normal, but like who's normal? But people like me, people who are like creative class, like musicians, whatever, like they're also doing drugs. And so, you can't stop it. But I think that the idea to me of like government legalization and distribution and quality checks and products and marketing and branding around drugs, all of this was like mind blowing to me. So I moved to Los Angeles. I mean, I was in New York for a long time before that, but I moved to Los Angeles specifically with this vision of like covering the legalization of drugs from a very optimistic standpoint. And I think that what I witnessed as I got deeper and deeper into the belly of the beast is just feeling complete like disillusionment and cynicism, and just this idea that psychedelics are just amplifying, you know, the destruction of the direction, the destructive direction that we're already going down, and it's being incorporated into capitalism the way that capitalism eats everything. And yeah, I think that now where I stand is that I'm definitely pro decrim, but the question of legalization, I think, is much more murky to me. Yeah, I think that like the same thing with like protest culture too. Like to be honest, like counterculture, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Like I placed so much faith into counterculture as like a way of a truly radical way of like envisioning revolution. And I think that where we stand now politically is like so much more bleak than it was in 2020. And I'm just like, yeah, like I just don't know how to escape from this. I don't see the way out. And I think that a lot of people right now are super excited about psychedelics. Like I'm constantly being hit up by people asking like where they can access it, when I'm throwing my next party, like, you know, just everyone has questions and so much enthusiasm. But I almost feel like, you know, because you and I have been in the world for longer and like have been keeping track of like the news that's happening around, you know, the corporate side of it, I think, you know, I almost want to raise a flag and be like, this might not be what we all think it's going to be, you know?
Yeah. There's a lot of people who are like excited to like new to this, and it's like, it's a journey, and it is hard to see exactly where all that's going to go. But, you know, maybe this, look, some things need to break down too. Like there are a lot of systems and ways we do things that can't continue, most of the ways we do things. And sometimes I wonder too if like the way, maybe it's exacerbating the collapse in a way so that something new can be born. But it's like, I think for all of us, we just want to see the least amount of suffering. And there's so much suffering, and it's just, as you said, it can look pretty bleak on the options. But I still believe that, or maybe it's common sense to me, that change happens from the inside out. Like, how else does it happen? From a person at a time, like doing their work, I would hope, having discoveries and hopefully making changes, and that's how the world starts to shift. So I do think that the inner work matters. But there's this line where it's like, how do we help people not fall into delusion where it's like, oh, I'm doing the work. And it's like, you're just now an Instagram influencer who's eating your own tail, you know, of like, because you're getting bigger and like now it just becomes more extreme. And like, I don't have that full answer. It's got to be probably something to do with community, some kind of witness, something to hold you accountable. But something about like social media or the way it works online, it doesn't do that. If anything, it just amplifies one side. It doesn't really provide you with real feedback.
Some of the biggest psychedelic influencers out there are like the most toxic people. I think that it has to go beyond yourself. I think that a lot of people think they do the inner work and that's enough. And yeah, I think that's kind of the trouble with a lot of rave culture too, is that I think we think, oh, we're transforming ourselves and we're fighting all of these sorts of limitations on who you can be as a person through, you know, coming out on the other end of this sort of tunnel or whatever, this crazy, like almost magical place that is the rave, and you emerge on the other side and you've become this like fully transformed freak. And that's great.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. Yeah.
That's great. But then I also find like that often the work kind of stops there. and there isn't much thinking around like how can we use the principles of rave culture or of psychedelics to transform or even just apply them to like the messiness of everyday life, because outside of the rave and outside of the ceremony, life is so messy and there's so much ego and there's so much competition and bickering and complexity, and it's much harder to be like, oh, we're all connected and we're all one and everything feels so good and I love you, man. Like that ethos is really hard to integrate, I would say, into the everyday, but that's where the work lies.
Hands down, yeah, that's where the work is. Ram Dass had that great thing where, you know, his name's always getting high, you know, and I always have to come down, and it's a bummer. And it's like, I think one of his teachers said, why don't you try taking the curriculum, like here on Earth? You know, it's like, I guess you could keep skipping school in a way, but it's like, you know, you're here, and life is the playing field in a sense. And we often try to escape that as opposed to like having experiences that give us insight about the thing we're facing, which is our relationships, you know, the people right next to us, or yourself. That's where the rubber meets the road, and your pet, and, you know, how's all that going? Like your friends and your family, you know, that's the hardest stuff. Yeah. It's easier to kind of project some kind of image of yourself outside through like even podcasts and things. It's like, these are all just like images of ourselves in a way. But I know everyone's trying to, I do believe a lot of people want in their hearts to be part of like something new becoming. I do believe that most people, it's just sort of, we're all searching for authentic paths in a way that actually we have, and frankly, we have time for. Like it's crazy world. We're all just trying to make it. And it is fairly bleak.
I do feel you're right. Something new is coming, and we can all feel it. Like the old way is dying. A new paradigm is emerging. Yeah. We don't have the language for it quite yet. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that we can all feel it, but have difficulty expressing it. And, you know, as a writer, I believe so much in the power of language to help us to think through changes, especially really big paradigm shifts like this. So, yeah, I think like as we continue to discuss all of these things that we're feeling, probably the language and the schema will come about to truly understand what's happening. But for now, it's more of just like this ambient feeling of like dissolution in the air. I'm curious if we could talk a little bit before our conversation has to end about your ceremonial concerts. I would love to hear about what you're trying to do with those and how maybe they fit into the new paradigm.
Well, I mean, briefly, I can say that the music started, as we discussed earlier, in the underground for private ceremonies. So it was a very like specific thing. And there's like, let's say 20 people and you're playing to guide the ceremony. But as I started to move this into a more public space, you know, a couple years ago, I did a tour where it was I called it a ceremony concert tour, and I was in the middle of the room and everyone could lie down, and much bigger rooms, up to like 500 plus people, and having sitters, as you were talking about, trying to have some support and structure in that, and certainly some kind of group expectations, and the hardest thing about it has been the economics of it. Because in order to do things like that and not have alcohol in the room, it's very difficult to book spaces.
Oh my God, we should talk about this because I have a similar problem.
Yeah. The whole industry is like now against you to like make this event happen. So now you have to put up the capital to rent like non-traditional rooms that are like whatever, warehouse, whatever it could be. A place where weddings happen, some giant room, 12,000 square feet or something. Now you have to bring in sound. You have to bring in everything. So your costs start ballooning, and now your ticket prices are expensive. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, yeah, I guess we're doing it, and people are showing up. But it's something about that just feels like it's like you're pushing this boulder uphill, which I suppose makes sense. If it's truly going to be counterculture in a sense, it's either got to be like some kind of struggle. But I feel like, how is this punk rock to have like $150 ticket?
Exactly,
you know?
Exactly.
But having your expenses being, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I've just been struggling with like how to make that work in a way that works for all of us.
Totally.
That's not just exclusive.
I'm having the same dilemma because, yeah, like you can't quite make up the same revenue through the bar when you're not selling alcohol. And that is one of the disappointing lessons that I've learned, I think. Like I've spent so much time working with bartenders to come up with like such a cool non-alcoholic menu of like all these different potions with, different types of plants in them. But inevitably people are, I would say, curious to try one drink, maybe two, but it's not the same as like
they're on other drugs. Yeah,
they're on other drugs that they have brought themselves and that last much longer. And in the end, like I don't care because like alcohol energy sucks at a party anyway. So like to me the trade-off is worth it, but it is extremely hard to balance the budget without selling alcohol.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. Also, like you said, the energy. So it's like so it's like I guess I can just play. Okay, for instance, Pico Union in LA played a show there last year, summer or this year, and I remember we're setting up. It's a hall, so it's like a big room, and beautiful hall, and they have these sort of chairs or pews, and we were deciding where to put them, and I was like, just put them against the wall or something, and they're like, oh, it's gonna block the bar, and I was like, I wouldn't worry about the bar, like. People are going to come in, they're going to plop themselves down, and they're going on a journey. It just, and they couldn't believe it. They're like, no, it's impossible. There's going to be a line here. There's always going to be a bar thing, and no one was really interested in the bar.
Right.
They all had figured out what they were going to do, but then the people who do want to imbibe at the bar, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but then you have like it's sort of like different energies in the room, like. Sort of the alcohol thing going on, and then the people who are all like blissed out in a very tender space.
Right. Well, I still am hanging on to this idea of like a really cool non-alcoholic bar because like as someone who doesn't drink myself, like I love going to a bar and seeing like, oh, they have like 6 different items on here that look really delicious. And then
there's more of it.
And then you can boost it with like, I mean, I've had like, weed infused drinks or like Kana infused drinks where you are getting a psychoactive effect from these drinks too. It's just not liquor. But what's also hard, I think, is like when people are tripping, you also kind of want to lean more heavily into the harm reduction zone and like provide free water. And I did that at my last party. We had like jugs of free water in like the safe space area that I was talking about, as well as at the bar. And the thing is that I hate saying this, but like as a business owner, like my heart was kind of crushed because I just saw everybody like going for the free water, just kind of mindlessly like drinking the free water. And I'm like, that's cool. Yeah. Like, I'm glad that you are doing that for yourself, but like, you're not even looking at this like beautiful menu that like me and like 3 bartenders have created for you. I think that it's just too new. Like this paradigm is too new. People aren't used to it. So they're either used to like, oh, I'm going to drink booze or I'm just going to slam the free water and like do drugs. And there isn't as much of a like space of curiosity around like, let me try this plant medicine drink that like is delicious. But I have faith because it's not the first time that this has happened. Like in the 90s, rave culture, like they used to have these things called smart bars that were like juice bars basically at the rave because a lot of places did not have liquor licenses. And so like these juice bars were like really early prototypes of like Erewhon style, like juice culture before that shit was cool. And they would put in like a lot of supplements and adaptogens and reishi mushrooms and stuff into those drinks. So like, it was a huge part of rave culture back in the day. And I want to kind of bring that back, but then like update it by inviting, honestly, to be completely honest, like sponsors, like brands that want to tap into these markets of enthusiasts. And I think that my party is full of people like that who are really interested to, at least like technically or ideologically, they're interested in like sober culture or like post-alcohol culture. Yeah. So I wonder if like sponsorship models is like one way to get around the problem. Like, instead
It
of.
could be. Yeah, and we had a little bit of that. Numinous sponsored that last tour. It was a portion of it, and it helped a lot. But yeah, I don't know. It's like you're right. It's a transition, and we're using systems that need to change, but you can't be outside those systems fully. So you have to do hybrids in a way right now.
Yeah.
I think if you really want to work, if you really want to meet people where they're at, and it is
Maybe
tricky.
that's-
It takes a lot of experimentation.
That's a good note for me because I feel like I'm so always wanting to be like at the very edge of the frontier that I forget that like a lot of people aren't quite there yet, and then I get disappointed. But I think you're right. I think it is about hybridity and meeting people where they are now, and then you gently kind of push it in that direction instead of being like, you're not allowed to come to this party if you're drinking booze, which is not the vibe at my party, but maybe that could come across. It could come across that way.
Yeah, there's other invitations that are just better,
Yeah.
and eventually people are going to try them out, and they're like, "This is awesome."
I do agree with you totally, though, that like the barrier to entry is the biggest issue right now, and like I didn't feel great about how much my last party cost ticket-wise, although it was impossible not to charge that much. Like we just broke even, and I left with the feeling of like, oh my God, like I want to go in the total opposite direction. I want my next party to be totally free. I want it to be like a renegade, like OG Burning Man style, like out in the desert or in a forest. And the only barrier to entry is how much effort you want to put in to get there. And I feel like that weeds out the crowd in a much more interesting way than like a high ticket price. I was like, kind of a notorious Burning Man hater last year.
Yeah, I saw your article.
Yeah. Like pissed off the whole Burning Man Reddit. But like, I wasn't given the opportunity to like write the in-depth magazine feature that honestly I would love to write. So like I would totally go back and like kind of explain how I feel about it more in depth, because the way that I was given the opportunity to cover it last year was in the context of this very specific climate protest that was going on. And I think there's so much more to Burning Man to discuss. Like climate is a hugely interesting part of it for sure. And like what contradictions or hypocrisies, as well as what actual work the Burning Man community is doing there. But like I walked away from that festival, and I'm going to call it a festival. I'm fucking sorry. It's a festival.
What else would you call it? They have another name for it?
A lot of the burners were like, this is not a festival. It's like a radical gathering or something. But I'm like, it's a festival because you have to buy tickets to it. Like, and I think that the extremely high barrier to entry, like I spent $2,000 getting there and I was like roughing it. Like I wasn't even part of a camp, It took away so much of that renegade spirit that I'm sure was like a huge part of OG Burning Man, and I could feel it. I'm like, this is a lot of rich people who think they know how to party but have no idea. I'm sorry. I'm gonna get so much more hate for this.
Oh, make a clip of that. I love it. That's so funny. Oh, it's good. Well, it could be a good place to close, actually. So Rave New World, that's your Substack,
Rave
right?
New World is my platform for discussing sort of the new paradigms of drugs and rave culture through the lens of what's happening now, which I think is very interesting because so-called counterculture is changing a lot. And I think it's really important to locate where the new axis of powers might lie.
Yeah. And just where the real subversiveness is. Like, what is counterculture? Because it is, in some cool ways, becoming like, where is it and what is it anymore? It's a good question.
Let's go around the world and look for it.
Well, maybe we can talk again. You can help continue to give us the pulse on what you are discovering and seeing out there, because especially globally, I think that's fascinating.
I would love
stuff.
to. Thank you so much for having me on. It was really nice to chat.
Yeah, it's fun. Thanks, Michelle. Oh, and where the Substack's easy to find. I mean, I'll put it in the show notes, but is there any other links that I should know about?
Honestly, if you just Google Rave New World, my Substack is thankfully the first thing that comes up. And that's where you can find out about my parties, as well as all of the field notes that I'm releasing from, my explorations.
Wicked. Well, I'll put that link just down below. And thanks again. Thank you, Michelle. That was fun. I hope we can do it again. And it's great to learn more about all these different perspectives and edges of this world that we're in together. So thank you for coming on. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Currents, and it features or was made with the great Anna and myself. Love making music with her. Hope we can do more. And it'd be even fun to somehow play this song out live. Maybe at Treefort for my music set, because they have such a killer club system in there. It's clean and it's big. Maybe. We'll see. Thank you to everyone on our Patreon council, patreon.com/East Forest. Thank you for supporting. Go check it out. See if you want to join the council. Other than that, I'll see you at Treefort if you're here in Boise coming up. You guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.